I've always been deeply inspired by mountain athletes who can perform at a very high level alone. People like Uli Steck or Marc-Andre Leclerc come to mind. I choose those names very carefully, though, to underline the severity of these types of endeavors. Sufficeth to say, while I happen to enjoy working alone, I do not advocate that practice, broadly speaking, unless you have developed the appropriate workflows, mindset, and skill set to do so with an appropriate margin of safety. I've been tinkering around with negative ridden wood solo for a number of years now, and have finally hit upon a workflow that is reasonably feasible to implement. To start out with, I'm using Regcoat style branch rigging techniques to manage the branches that were longer than could fit in the drop zone. I'd like to draw a distinction between climber-controlled rigging, a la Jerry B or Graham McMahon, style friction control, and what I'm doing here, which is truly solo rigging. Now, while it is a bit of a lost art, I do believe that climber-controlled rigging does have a place in a modern production ARB crew if it's the skill is developed, particularly for light-handed operations or the ability to have a climber manage a drift. It just really makes having dual line control a lot lighter and easier than if you were to do that fully by the book. But in this case, we're talking about truly solo rigging where there's nobody to untie the piece when it hits the ground. Were there other ways that this job could be completed? Of course. The simplest would, of course, have been to have a contractor work with me on this day. The next obvious one would be to drop chunks. This approach, though, allowed me to work truly solo, which I value and enjoy, and additionally, it resulted in less impact to the property, as well as fewer trips up and down the tree than it would have been required for me to ensure no bad bounces in dropping firewood. I probably would have needed to climb the tree half a dozen times at least if I were chunking firewood, where with this approach I only climbed the tree 3 times. So here's what the drop zone looked like after my first climb of the day. Next, I'll walk through an uncut bit of video of a whole cycle of rigging a piece solo. I'm using a Morgan block here for friction management. Other aerial friction devices like whatever the Rock Exotica is calling the commercial version of this device, the rig and wrench or a safe block could definitely be used. Porter wrap could work, but it's obviously a lot more cumbersome to carry around on one's harness, so I'd recommend using a purpose-built aerial friction device if it's available. As far as cutting is concerned, I'm using a Wonder Cut here, as much as I hate that term. It's, as far as I can tell, the best way to approach this because it allows enough directional control and allows the saw to be stowed and an adjustment of work positioning to happen before pushing the piece off, such that you're able to be in the right spot to make the catch. The Double Beast is obviously a bit oversized for this application, just happens to be one of the relatively few Dedeye ring slings I own. The location where the end of the rigging line is terminated is somewhat critical. You just want to make sure that it's offset enough from your friction device so that the rope doesn't run over itself as the piece is rigged. Obviously, you want to get the orientation of the running bow correct so that it doesn't just get sucked right up into the rigging device. seeing Tomo on Instagram use a pry bar for pushing off wood was actually the piece that brought this whole workflow together, as it allows you to push the piece off while being low enough to be in the right position to make the catch. With this setup, I was shooting for around the 350-pound mark for my pieces. With some tinkering and maybe using a different device like a safe block and a glove, I think you could definitely push that up into the 500-pound region. That being said, you don't have that much margin for error there, so work up to it very carefully. Finally, rope management is obviously critical for any kind of solo tree work, but it's particularly critical here as the slightest snag or stick caught in a rope could cause it to not feed through the ring, and then you've got an extra climb on your hands. Peace.